Hello YouTube! Today we're in the northern part of Laos called Phongsali, and we've been here for over a week now, and we were called like a couple of months ago. A French NGO called the CCL contacted us. It's a French NGO that does agricultural development in all of Laos, and they called us to give some training to the tea farmers here, especially regarding the processing and the tea garden management. So we were really excited by this offer, and of course we accepted it. And as soon as we had finished our processing run in Jingmai Mountain, we flew to Laos to have a look at this area. It was the first time we came here, so the first couple of days consisted mainly in exploration. So we rode our motorbike through the dirt tracks along the valleys. Here I'm now standing in the main plateau, which is located at 700 meters of altitude, on which the main town of Otai is located. And from this town you have three main valleys that point towards China. Okay, so we're at the border with China, and at the end of those valleys there's a big mountain range that makes the border between China and Laos. And if you go to China, you'll be in Yiwu Mountain, Yiwu area. Okay, so we're just close to Xishuangbanna, basically. So despite being in a different country, this region shares many similarities with Eastern Xishuangbanna. First, it's mainly populated by the Dai. So the Dai are called the Tai Lui here, but it's the same ethnicity, and they use the same language as in Xishuangbanna. So here the Dai populate the lowlands and mainly grow rice, and they also have a couple of cash crops and some corns on the lower slopes of the hills. And in the hills live the other ethnic minorities. Here it's mainly the Yao and the pu-erh that you can find. So you find mainly the Yao at the border with China in the western part of the district, and the pu-erh more in the east. So as you know, the Yao also populate the Yiwu area, so they are basically cousins, you know. All this area is separated politically, but not so much ethnically and geographically. We have the same kind of landscape here. So we spent most of our time in the Yao villages in the hills bordering China. And there, we found quite a lot of tea gardens. But those tea gardens are not what we're used to seeing in Xishuangbanna or in Yunnan in general. The tea trees here mainly grow in the forests, and they are very remote from the villages actually. It's very common to have to walk 2 to 3 hours before reaching those tea gardens and being able to pick them. We've seen some really big tea trees there, tea trees which apparently haven't been managed at all, because you can see this because they have a thick trunk and they grow very tall. Okay, in Xishuangbanna you can have old tea trees, ancient tea gardens, but those have been managed for quite a while. It means they have been pruned and pruned again, which means their trunk is not really straight. It does a bit like this. You have a little bit like an olive tree, you know. So it was very interesting to see those tea trees, and for huge tea trees like this, the picking is really hard, because you have to climb, you have to climb like 10 meters high before even being able to reach some tea leaves. They grow in very thick forests, which means a lot of shading, and which means that the tea trees have to compete. They want to reach the light, okay, so they will grow straight and tall. And there's no point for them in having low-hanging leaves, because they won't catch much light. The leaves here are very green because of the heavy shading. The tea leaves will make more chlorophyll to compensate for the shade and try to catch as much sunlight as possible and convert it into energy. So because of the interest for those big tea trees, the locals also extended the tea gardens there. They planted a lot of small tea trees. Maybe, it all started at the same time as Yunnan, maybe a bit later, but most of the small trees were planted between 2007 and 2010. Okay, so they are still pretty small, but what's interesting is they don't really prune them. In some of the gardens we've visited, they actually pull the branches down so that it makes like a bow shape, and that's quite a clever way of not pruning the tea trees but still having them in a reachable distance so that picking is made easier. So it was an interesting lesson we got here in tea garden management. Now the main difference really is the environment. Compared to the typical natural tea gardens that you find everywhere in the famous tea mountains of Yunnan now, those tea gardens are not very densely planted. The forest environment is very preserved actually. They don't really cut the big trees to give more way for the sunlight. So we're still in a heavy shaded environment, which is pretty rare in Xishuangbanna. I've only seen similar tea gardens in Guafengjai and Dingjiazai, which border this area. So you can say they grow really in the same terroir, the same location. In the villages close to the border, the main income for the farmers is tea farming. Because they have extended their tea plantation, they have a lot of forested tea gardens. They keep extending those forested tea gardens by planting new tea trees every year. And they sell the bulk of their tea to China, especially to Yiwu. Actually, a lot of the tea is just bought by Maocha collectors from Yiwu, or even some people from Yiwu come directly here to process the tea themselves, and then they very likely sell it as Yiwu tea in China. Those collectors can take advantage of the reputation of Yiwu tea to make a very high markup on those teas. In Xishuangbanna, we also see a slowly growing trend of naming Laos tea properly. It means that you have your pu-erh cake, it says it comes from Laos, and sometimes from some villages. Some villages are starting to get famous in Laos, but it's still the minority. I would say most of the tea is sold as Yiwu tea. Some of these teas are even sourced by big factories in Monghai and enter in the blends of some famous cakes. So when the villages have a lot of tea gardens and are well connected to China, they specialize in tea farming. Most of their income comes from selling tea to the Chinese. Now, if they are not as well connected, they mainly rely on slash and burn agriculture in the hills. Basically, slash and burn agriculture means that you cut the forest, you burn it, then the soil is fertile for a couple of years. You can grow corn or upland rice on those soils only for a couple of years. After a couple of years, the fertility is depleted and you have to abandon the field. The forest regrows, and you use another patch of land, you cut again another patch of forest, you burn it, and you have a fertile soil again. Okay, so you have a rotation of soils. But for example, after you burn the field, maybe you can use it for 2 or 3 years, and then you need another patch, and maybe you're going to need to wait for 10 years to be able to cultivate that piece of land again. Well, it's okay if you have a low population density, and it's quite okay here because there is a low population density, but in many parts of the world the soils are degraded because of this technique, just because there's not enough land to support that kind of agriculture. Let's say that kind of agriculture cannot support a high amount of population per surface. And it's also a very hard life. The yields are not high, and it's only possible for subsistence agriculture. You can't really make money and have a decent living conditions with that type of farming. So in the tropical upland areas, there's typically a push to switch from slash and burn agriculture to other kinds of farming, namely cash crops. So it could be banana plantations, coffee, tea, rubber tree plantations. And here the forested tea offers a great opportunity, because while most of the cash crops, you could say, have a heavy impact on the environment because it implies a dramatic change in landscape, it implies the use of pesticides, and also usually has an impact on the soil quality. Planting forested tea gardens allows to protect the forest, protect the biodiversity, and still get a really good source of income. So I think it's a really good option for those who are connected to the Chinese market, because they can sell that tea for a high price in Xishuangbanna. So after this visit of the tea gardens, well, we held several small training sessions in different villages around the district, and then we held one big training session which lasted for 2 days in a quite central location of the district, and about maybe 30 people attended. 30 tea farmers attended the training session. We were talking mainly about pu-erh tea processing, and the main focus, of course, was the shaching, the kilgreen process. In most of the teas we tried here, the shaching was not strong enough. It means the farmers didn't cook the leaves for enough time, so like the tea stems are red because, well, as you know, that the tea stems need quite a long time, need a longer time than the leaves to cook properly. And what's typical is that you just move the leaves around and the water evaporates, and maybe after 15 minutes or 20 minutes here you run out of water and you have to take the leaves out of the wok, and at that point the leaves are cooked but the stems are not. So after a couple of hours, a couple of days, they just turn red, and this has a big influence on the taste. Compared to Jingmai, the tea leaves here are very big and thick, just like in Yiwu. So the typical cooking time, the proper cooking time, should be between 30 and 40 minutes. And we saw that here the farmers typically cook for more 20-25 minutes, which is really not enough. So during the training session, the focus was on the cooking time and how to preserve the water in the batch. We also talked a lot about the care that must be put during the transportation of the fresh leaves from the forests to the processing area. Those gardens are remote. That means you have to ride your motorbike for an hour or walk for 2 or 3 hours. Because of the long transportation times, many of the leaves are damaged, and when they are bruised while in the bags, after the withering, some parts of them, the bruised leaves, will turn red, and that can alter the quality of the tea, especially if the withering time is long and if there's been a lot of bruising. So we gave specific instructions on how to protect the leaves during transportation. We also talked a bit about the handling of the leaves after the processing. We showed them hand rolling. This part they were doing quite well, and we talked also about tea marketing and how to sell your tea well as a tea farmer, how to promote your teas, how to find more business connections. So it was a very interesting mission, and it's the last day today. We're taking the plane back to Vientiane tomorrow. During our training session we processed 180 kilograms of fresh leaves, so that should be about 40 kilograms of dry leaves. We'll bring them back to pu-erh and press them into cakes, and then they will be available on our website. This is very good quality material here, and I'm sure if the farmers process the tea properly and market it properly, and by this I mean not selling it as Yiwu tea, but making sure that their name is put on the final product, the price of tea in this area will increase and the reputation will increase. It's time, I think, to push the tea distribution here further and try to make a Laos brand of tea and promote the tea from the Otai district, and label each village, do more work on the exploration and the presentation of the tea gardens, so that in the end those teas will have a higher value on the market, and we will strive for this. And that's why this year we're going to sell some of those teas on farmerleaf.com. So it's getting dark now, so I'm gonna leave you here. Thank you for watching and see you next time. Bye bye.